So it's been a real honor to serve as executive director for the Western Slope Conservation Center. And we have also been really honored to be partners in the Art at Work Symposium. So I'd like to thank Deirdre for all of her work in making this happen. And it's really an incredible collection of ideas and conversations and projects and artworks that we're all getting to participate in. And the North Fork Valley and all the communities in it will benefit for many years to come, thanks to all the conversations being had through this symposium. So I am, again, honored to introduce Basia Irland, Professor Emerita and founder of the Art and Ecology program at the University of New Mexico. Her talk today, which will be followed by a panel discussion, a Q&A session, is titled Reading the River. Irland is a Fulbright scholar, author, poet, sculptor, installation artist, and activist who creates international water projects featured in 2 books, Water Library and Reading the River, the ecological activist art of Basia Irland. Today, Irland will discuss the essays she writes for National Geographic about global rivers and the Gathering of Waters projects, which connect communities and foster dialogue, person to person, along the length of rivers, including the entire 1,875-mile Rio Grande. And with that, I am happy to welcome Basia Irland to the stage. Thank you.
Is the mic on? Yes. Okay. So after lunch, it's always a hard time because everybody is ready for a nap and they get all sleepy. So I'm going to keep you occupied with paddling in your individual canoes and kayaks for the next few minutes. So please, now, if you would, pick up your paddle and join me as we float downstream on rivers around the world. And as we float downstream, keep this thought in mind. My son Derek is standing at a podium in the middle of the Rio Grande. He is tweaking a well-known quote. Ask not what this river can do for you, but what you can do for this river. These are the arteries within my body and within all of our bodies. And these are the rivers of New Mexico where I live. Slosh, slosh, slosh. We are water. Our bodies hold streams, sweat, blood, tears, urine. Water enters, circulates within us, and leaves. Each of us is a walking river, sloshing along with damp insides held together by paper-thin skin. We are not separate from the waters of the world. Because I live in New Mexico, my external watershed is the Rio Grande, but my internal watershed is this, urine, fresh from this morning. Everything is connected through a cycle. I flush my pee down the toilet, which goes to the sewage treatment plant, which flows into the river, which then again provides drinking water. Our water future will depend upon a commitment to creative actions, constellations of diversity, collaboration and cooperation, community and culture, Compassion, this is the word that when we talk about water issues, we rarely talk about, especially in academic circles, but is so important. Conservation and communication. I photographed this woman bringing water from the Narmada River in India at dawn. Around the world, women are traditionally the carriers of water, having to walk for hours to a source that is often highly polluted. Global refugees have been forced to flee cities with infrastructure that has been destroyed. And then, in refugee camps, there is a constant struggle to find enough water to survive. All of us rely on water, from the smallest ant to this magnificent friend of mine, resting in the Rapti River in southern Nepal, who is infected with schistosomiasis, a waterborne disease. Recently, rivers have been granted the same legal status as a person. The Maori in New Zealand have fought for 140 years to have their ancestral river, the Wanganui, given legal rights as a living entity, meaning that if anyone harms or pollutes the river, the law would view it as no different from harming a person. This is the Rio Grande in the high arid desert of New Mexico near Socorro. This was last year when I took this photograph. It's south of Albuquerque where I live, which has become nothing but a river of sand. Imagine if this were what most of the world's rivers looked like today. It is important to know where our water comes from. In Western cultures, we often take water totally for granted. We get up each day, take a shower, brush our teeth, flush the toilet without much thought where that water comes from and how grateful we need to be for every single drop. I really appreciated in Robin's talk that idea of gratitude and how important that is. The Gathering of Waters projects connect people by handing a canteen and logbook person to person along the entire length of a river. These actions are not about planning seminars in boardrooms or endless discussions indoors in offices. It requires getting one's feet wet, experiencing the body of water firsthand. The gatherings help to establish ongoing networks and partnerships and help participants get into the mud, muck, and complexities and eddies around each bend in the river's course. The canteen and logbook travel the river by boat, bus, bike, car, on horseback, on foot, and even by hot air balloon. Here, people are logging into the logbook and adding their personal stories about the river. The gathering along the Rio Grande took 5 years to do. The river begins its 1,875-mile journey in southern Colorado, flows through New Mexico, and becomes the border between Texas and Mexico. This is the Santa Fe Indian School track team running 150 miles as they carried water from the Pueblo of Taos to the Pueblo of Isleta in 2 days. At each pueblo, there was an exchange of river water and a shared meal. The emphasis with each gathering is about process, grassroots, collaborative, and locally based actions. I work closely with scientists on all my projects. This is a bioengineer at the University of Colorado. We create video documentaries. including a sewage treatment plant. No matter what I was teaching every semester at the University of New Mexico, I would always take my students to the sewage treatment plant. So I think it's really important that we understand that process. We flush the toilet, we usually don't even think about where our waste goes. But it's really important because that waste then goes directly back into our rivers, which is the point that I was making with my own urine. The Rio Grande, the outflow from the sewage treatment plant in Albuquerque is the third largest tributary to the Rio Grande. We plant trees. We test water. A hydrologist is taking a sample from the headwaters at Decker's Creek in West Virginia, which is clean and healthy at this site. Whoops. However, a few miles downstream, we encounter acid mine drainage from an abandoned coal mine. This was really hard for me to see as a visual artist because this red looked as if it were bleeding directly into the water there. You can see here that the water at the source, which is the very top one when we tested it, was 7.7 pH. And yet at the mine, you can see right down there, the 1, 2, 3, the fourth from the bottom where it said Richard, that's the Richard mine. We tested it, the level of the pH dropped all the way to 4.2, which is not yet battery acid, but certainly not healthy. I love trekking to the source of a river, any river, to find where it begins. And to get to the source, or to hike along any river, you might want a sculptural backpack repository constructed from local materials, which holds data, photographs, watershed maps, clay samples, water tests, canteens, logbooks, video documentaries, and art objects. This is the one that I built for the Rio Grande. It's not particularly comfortable to hike with. It's very heavy. I know there are a number of you here from Boulder, so this will look familiar. This was the one that I built for Boulder Creek. I actually grew up in Boulder, but hadn't been back for many, many, many years when Lucy Lepard curated a show on climate change. And so this was the one that I built for Boulder Creek. The repository is built using beaver sticks, which I found along the way, and an old truck inner tube because that is the preferred method of transport along the creek. Nisqually River, Washington, built using cedar. Kit for paddling through stars floating on a lake in Quebec. So y'all can borrow these paddles if you didn't bring your own today. Actually, it was the reason why I carved these paddles was because I was canoeing every morning in this old beat-up canoe. I'd go out before dawn, and the paddles were like had holes in them. They were really bad. So I decided to carve my own. I carved these out of linden wood or lime wood. Seed repository for the Big Wood River in Idaho. This wood made from an old fishing vest, which was given to me. The Oconee River in Georgia. I worked with a biologist whose research focused on algae. This backpack is modeled from a navicula, a diatom that is in the shape of a boat. Apothecary for creeks and other living beings in Ohio. This one is really fun to wear. We've done videos of this, and all of the glass containers hit together, so you have this musical score as you're walking along the trail. And this one we constructed just a couple of months ago. I was invited up to Canada to the Saskatchewan River Delta. So this repository is made using red willow. Gifts are created as a thank you for all of the community members who have participated. For me, this is very important because, again, this was something Robin talked about this morning. It's the idea of reciprocity. These people within the community have helped me a lot, and there's usually hundreds of people that are involved in each one of these projects at the sites where I'm invited in to work with the local community. So this is my way of thanking them and giving back. And they're all different depending upon where it is. This was ones for the Rio Grande, which were made out of river clay, the clay was collected along the whole length of the river. And then we made these small little canteens that were embedded with the stamp of the river. And sometimes even the community gets involved in the making of the gifts itself. This was up in Washington State. We always include watershed maps. It's very important for each of us within our own watershed to understand where we are and where all that water is coming from within our own watershed. And as a visual artist, I always need to envision what that map looks like. And a lot of times we use native riparian seed packets as gifts so that after I leave an area, people can then go in and plant the native riparian seeds to help restore their particular river. Hydrolibros are carved wooden books coated with earth and natural elements. We are this river of turquoise flowing to the sea. We are the water pent up behind a dam. We are the language of salmon bones in the night sky. Each of us is a book of drought. And we are this barnacle-encrusted volume studied intently by Darwin. Thought I'd just put in one slide of my outdoor studio. I try to be outside as much as possible and try not to be indoors whenever I'm working. Through time-based works, ice receding, books receding, emphasizes the necessity of collective effort, scientific knowledge, and poetic intervention to deal with the complex issues of climate disruption and watershed restoration through the release of seed-laden, ephemeral ice sculptures into rivers. Glaciers are receding. On Mount Rainier in Washington State, this is the Nisqually Glacier that used to be miles long and now has almost totally disappeared. And we saw that this morning with Anna doing her walk, carrying the ice, symbolizing the melting of the glaciers. When this particular glacier is gone, so will the river to which it gives birth. So you can see here, I videotaped this so much. This is actually called the tongue of the glacier, which I really like because it directly relates to our own physical bodies, our own tongues. Right where that promontory of ice comes down is where the Nisqually River begins. These ice books have found their way into rivers around the world. This was the very first one that I did, and it happened to be here in Colorado. This was in Boulder. It was a 300-pound book. It took 4 of us to carry it out into the river. Marta, who is here today, was there for this. In New Mexico, at dawn, in Belgium, the Netherlands, in France, in Canada, and Iran, where I worked via the internet with a group of women environmental artists. I really like this because I'm invited all over the world to do various projects, but I'm always conscious of my footprint in so doing. So this time, when these women wanted to work with me, although I would love to go to Iran, it was also really nice to know that I could stay at home, they could be there, we could correspond via Skype back and forth. I could instruct them how to build these ice books, and then they put it into this beautiful river there. So it was a wonderful experience. The seeds form an international ecological language, a riparian text. And for those of you who were scholars, now you have a new way to write your footnotes using riparian grass seeds. The cottonwood seed text is read intensely by a young girl. The books are launched into rivers with community participation. And sometimes the books are launched from kayaks. I want to take just a brief moment at this juncture to say something about the word ephemerality, because I'm often asked when I do these ice books, people say, but Basia, why don't you carve them in marble or in stone or in wood so that they will last a long period of time? And the whole essence behind these is that they dissolve, that they melt, that they disappear, that they go back to the river to which they came, because I use river water to construct them. Translator and poet David Hinton describes ancient Chinese poets who, as a form of spiritual practice, would write on rocks and trees with water-soluble ink that would wash away in the rain. So the poem was complete only when it vanished. This is how I feel about the ice books and about our own lives. We are only on this earth for a short period of time, and it's wondrous indeed for each of us to embrace our own ephemerality. In each region where I am invited, the projects are co-created in collaboration with community. Along the Rio Grande, or along the Oconee River in Georgia, or the Great Miami River in Ohio. Stream ecologists, river restoration biologists, and botanists help to ascertain the best seeds for each specific riparian zone. So you can read along with me here. These are some of the benefits of plants to rivers. Plants sequester carbon, they mitigate floods and drought, pollinate other plants, disperse seeds, create soil regeneration and preservation, act as filters for pollutants and debris, supply leaf litter for food and habitat, promote aesthetic pleasure, hold the banks in place to slow erosion, and provide shelter and shade for riverside organisms, including us. The text on this book could be Urdu or maybe Arabic, but the words are formed from mountain mahogany seeds. I could spend the next 5 hours just talking about the miraculous sculptures of seeds. I'm just going to show you this one because it is so amazing. These little sculptures are the mountain mahogany seeds, and they fall from the tree and literally spiral themselves into the soil. I see some people in the audience going, yes, like this. Yeah, they are really incredible that they can do this. Waterborne diseases kill a child somewhere in the world every 8 seconds. So if you can just wrap your head around that in terms of how many seconds I have been up here speaking, and try to imagine how many children have died around the world, often from preventable waterborne diseases. My interest in waterborne diseases occurred when I contracted Giardia while on a Fulbright scholarship in Indonesia. But you do not have to go to Indonesia. It's rampant here in Colorado, it's rampant in New Mexico, in a lot. Have any of you ever had Giardia? Yep, see, look how many hands went up. My doctor had a hard time diagnosing what it was, so I was very grateful when they found out. But when I did find out what I had, started going over to the medical library and studying all these atlases of parasitology and trying to learn, and they are fascinating visually to see what they look like. So what appears here that could be a fertile field, like it's taken from a drone flying over some field, it's actually a tissue sample that is highly infected with Giardia. It's also here in New Mexico and in Colorado, it's often called beaver fever because it's transmitted through the feces of beaver. Guinea worm is a particularly awful parasite because it grows within the body and then painfully exits through an arm or a leg. The Carter Center in Atlanta has been working for years to try to eradicate guinea worm, and actually they have been very, very successful. There are a few holdouts in Northern Africa where there are still some cases of this. But what happens is when it's contracted by like walking through a field or into a water source barefoot, and then the worm, the little tiny parasite gets up into your body. Once it's in your body, it starts growing, and then it emerges through a sore on your arm or your leg, and they will take a stick and begin wrapping it like this in order to pull it out of the body, and that can take weeks just in and of itself. So after that's a good, this is your dessert after lunch, right? it's like yuck. So this is actually, when I was at the Carter Center, this is actually a picture of what the worms look like. They're very small, but you can see they can grow very, very big and long and not pleasant. As we know, cholera kills thousands of people a year due to unsafe water. And I could go in again into all the stories in Haiti and all the places around the world where cholera has been rampant. I've worked for many years conducting research and producing art projects about waterborne diseases and received a grant with the chair of biology at the University of New Mexico to create a video. It was entitled Bilharzia Blues, an integrated artistic biological approach to schistosomiasis in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Nepal. In Nepal, I collaborated with parasitologists to research the ecology of the schistosomes, which are infecting not only the local populace, but also the elephants in the Rapti River, like that image that I showed you at the beginning of the talk. This is Dr. Prem Buddha, a parasitologist with whom I worked in Nepal. And this is what we were looking at through the microscope. We were collecting elephant dung to test for schistosomiasis, which is also known as bilharzia. This is my one sexy image. These are copulating schistosomes. Put a big X through this. I collaborate with musicians around the world. In Kathmandu, we wrote songs in Nepalese about how to avoid contracting bilharzia. And in Ethiopia, at the source of the Blue Nile on Lake Tana, the songs about Shisto were sung in Amharic. And then these were taken into the local communities so that the songs, as an educational way, to disperse information for those who aren't able to read. But everybody loves song, so it's a great way to disperse information. Last year, I had a large retrospective of water-related art in the Netherlands. So I'm just going to show you a few images from that show. We launched ice books into local rivers. This gallery contains some of the waterborne disease scrolls that I've just been talking with you about. Photographs of a few of the ice books. A room of the backpack repositories. We created a reflecting pool inside the museum. I've never had such a wonderful experience with this particular museum. It was like anything that I could imagine that I wanted to do. They hired 8 conservators to build this. I said, yes, I have this idea of a reflecting pool in the museum that I'd like to build. And they said, no problem. Where would you like it and how are we going to do it? So we did. What was that, Deirdre, 2 minutes? Oh, okay. A series of 7 contemplation stations, which are placed near local streams, where people could sit quietly and contemplate the flow of the current. And this will be the October cover of a magazine for the Chartered Institution of Water and Environment Management, published in the UK. On the facade of the museum was projected flowing river waters so that it appeared as if the museum were underwater. Indeed, with climate changes, someday all of the Netherlands might be below water level. I want to introduce you to 2 of my books, which was mentioned in the intro. This is Water Library, published in 2007, and Reading the River, published last year. I've been very fortunate the last 2 years to have been invited to write online essays for National Geographic about international rivers. These are written in the first person from the perspective of the river. The 3 I will discuss here focus on indigenous water rights. I am the Yaqui River in Mexico, polluted with noxious pesticide runoff from large agricultural businesses upstream. I witness poor families forced to purchase drinking water since none is available within the homes. This is a necessity that should be free and a given right for all people. I am the Nisqually River here in Washington State, where decades of legal battles lead to one of the most important Indian laws ever passed. The Bolt decision affirms Nisqually off-reservation fishing rights. I am the Narmada River, India, where pilgrims walk barefoot and carry all of their worldly possessions as they circumambulate my entire body in 2 to 3 year journey of over 1,600 miles. My natural flow is blocked at the Sardar Dam, one of the largest in the world, where my reservoir has displaced over 1 million Adivasi, or original inhabitants of the region, mostly poor indigenous tribal people, whose entire culture and livelihood are at stake. In this radically interconnected world, it becomes our collective responsibility to compassionately take care of each other and our environment. It is our responsibility to ensure that the next generations will have enough clean water to survive and to thrive. So now I'd like everybody to stand up. I know everybody's getting sleepy. I want you to stand up. And I want you to remember that what our bodies are made of, and how you are directly connected to the rivers in your own region, wherever you happen to live, whether it's here in Paonia or you came from elsewhere. So repeat with me and do this. Slosh, slosh, slosh. Thank you all very much.
Does anybody have?
Basia, is your retrospective still hanging in the Netherlands?
No, it came down.
They kidnapped it.
All the work is still over there.
It is?
Yeah, but it's not up.
Let's have a chat.
Okay.
An hour away, the University of, the UNESCO University that's in Delft has a program in international water management. My goddaughter is there getting her degree now.
Wow.
She grew up in Boulder County, and I said to her, you know this land, you need to do something that has to do with your own roots. And so water management was where she finally settled. So anyway, I'm just wondering if your work is still there, if there might be another way it could be seen again.
Be great.
And I could be there, I may be there at Christmas time, so perhaps
Perfect.
we should chat.
I'd love it. I do want to just quickly because you used the word management. At my university, we have a program called Water Resource Management, and I'm always talking to the director about, please just change it to water studies or something. We were talking this morning about the importance of words in our grammar and how important how we use words is to each of us and to our communities. I've always had a really difficult time with the word resource because it denotes something to be used. It's like referring to a forest as timber. So just be aware when you talk about water, be very careful about using the word resource because it's used again and again and again. So, any other questions?
Questions?
Yeah, Marta had one down here.
Thank you again for your wonderful work.
Thank you.
I know that your work really ignites a lot of conversation wherever it is. Have you been able to track like what your work does? I mean, like what changes it's been able to, and if you haven't, that's totally fine because most artists don't have that bandwidth, you know, but I was just curious.
That's a really interesting question, and actually there are 2 interviews right now with UK. I showed you the cover of one of them, and I was asked that same question in both interviews. And my response was, of course, a watery response. And as artists, I think we never know what the ramifications of what we do are. I think of it as a drop of water going into a still lake, and you have all these ripples, reverberations going out. And hopefully some of those will reach attentive. We were talking about the word attentive this morning, attention. Hopefully some of those will the ideas will bloom and reach attentive ears. But we never know. I think the only thing as artists we can do is just do the work and do it with passion and compassion as much as we can.
Sometimes you can, if I can just say this one thing, so we're trying to work in between, you know, with all these different folks, and a lot of times if you can hook up with a scientist, like, you know, then you can study what those impacts are. You get a big science grant.
Right, right, yeah. Well, it's one of the things we're working on with the ice books, for instance, is tracking the data using GPS systems and stuff. So that's a very different way of thinking, but I like all of those ways of thinking about a project.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how you are tracking that data with the ice
Well,
books?
that's what we're working on right now. It hasn't happened yet, so it will. I'm actually invited back up to Boulder to do another project.
No, but I mean, what are the plans for tracking that data? Or can you not say yet?
Well, again, it's very scientific. The technology is getting smaller and smaller now, so that what our hope is that we can actually embed the various tracking devices into the ice itself, and as it goes, so we'll be able to track where it is. Then we have to be able to find where how to be able to track it. I actually would like that technology to get so small that we could embed it within the seeds. And then we could actually, find out exactly where the seeds go and if they're able to regenerate. So.
One more question, anybody?
He's going to ask a question about vibrations.
No, I'm going to ask you, where do you create a 400-pound ice block? And do you have to spend hours carving that in a freezer?
Actually, that's a very interesting question because with chefs, they're the only ones that have big walk-in freezers. And so both of the large ones were created with chefs. So that, we would work outside and then they were on dollies and then we would push them into the freezer. But it's wherever like in Georgia, it was actually really difficult to work because it was so hot and humid there that the second we would take them out of the freezers, they would begin melting. And so I always work keep it very low tech. So I work with Japanese saws to take all the major stuff out, and then Dremel tools to do the pagination and where the seeds are going to go. So every place is totally different. When I was up in Washington, it was so cold I was able to just sit outside by the river and work all day. I loved it, I was just like, yeah. So I like that every place is so different, working. So yeah, that was a good question. Yeah.
I was wondering about the social aspect of your pieces, specifically gathering of the waters. And, you have these great images of people kind of celebrating this project. And I was wondering, does that happen at the end, or does it happen throughout? I like the kind of relay model that you have of connecting people all along down the river. But then do you have these kind of gatherings throughout, or how does that work?
I could spend hours talking about that, so I'm trying to think of how I can answer that question very quickly, because as with the ice books, every gathering of waters is totally different based on the community. So oftentimes what happens is when I'm invited in to a community, they will themselves have certain expectations, and they'll say, well, now what are we going to do next? And I'll say, until I have been there and spent time, and all of you who have been here in residence in Paonia know this, you have to spend time with the community before you can even begin engaging in some real way. So there's always a time process that occurs, getting to know who the people are that I'm working with, who the scientists are, who are the local. I always work with the indigenous tribes what their voice is, what's important to them, how they're affected by their particular river, and then the process can start evolving. So it really is totally different for every community. And one picture I'm realizing that I didn't show was in Idaho, where I was brought in because the river there has been completely channelized in concrete. And so the community for years has looked the other way. It hasn't looked toward, because it's not even called a river anymore. It's just so awful. And so I was brought in to work with the local people to begin thinking, what are other options now of ways to deal with that concrete channel, and how can you begin as a community to heal not just the community but that river and bring it back to some kind of natural life. So again, if you're like when I write these the essays about the rivers written in the first person, I think, oh my gosh, what if I were that river and I couldn't meander, which is the natural flow of any river, and I had to be channelized in this piece of concrete, and that would be my life spent in that concrete. So the dialogue goes back and forth all the time, and the results are totally different, again, based on, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but we can have a longer dialogue about all of these. It's the reason why I've recently started writing down my talks, because I get so dendritic there, so I could talk for an hour about every single image that's up there. So I have to try to keep within our time limit. So I really appreciate your patience, everybody. Thank you.